One evening, after a day in which Jaehaerys had been severely tested and battered, Maester Caliper said to him, "Your Grace, why do you punish yourself so harshly? The realm is at peace." The young king only smiled and replied, "The realm was at peace when my grandsire died, but scarcely had my father climbed onto the throne than foes rose up on every side. They were testing him, to learn if he was strong or weak. They will test me as well." He was not wrong, though his first trial, when it came, was to be of a very different nature, one that no amount of training in the yards of Dragonstone could possibly have prepared him for. For it was his worth as a man, and his love for his little queen, that were to be put to the test. We know very little about the childhood of Alysanne Targaryen. As the fifth-born child of King Aenys and Queen Alyssa, and a female, observers at court found her of less interest than her older siblings who stood higher in the line of succession. From what little has come down to us, Alysanne was a bright but unremarkable girl, small but never sickly, courteous, biddable, with a sweet smile and a pleasing voice. To the relief of her parents, she displayed none of the timidity that had afflicted her elder sister, Rhaena, as a small child. Neither did she exhibit the willful and stubborn temperament of Rhaena's daughter Arya. As a princess of the royal household, Alysanne would of course have had servants and companions from an early age. As an infant certainly she would have had a wet nurse. Like most noble women, Queen Alyssa did not give suck to her own children. Later a maester would have taught her to read and write and do sums, and a septa would have instructed her in piety, deportment, and the mysteries of the faith. Girls of common birth would have served as her maids, washing her clothing and emptying her chamber pot, and in good time she would certainly have taken ladies of a like age and noble blood as companions, to ride and play and sew with. Alysanne did not choose these companions for herself. They were selected for her by her mother, Queen Alyssa, and they came and went with some frequency, to ascertain that the princess did not grow too fond of any of them. Her sister Rhaena's penchant for showering an unseemly amount of affection and attention on a succession of favorites, some of whom were considered less than suitable, had been the source of much whispering at court, and the queen did not want Alysanne to be the subject of similar rumors. All this changed when King Aenys died on Dragonstone and his brother, Maegor, returned from across the narrow sea to seize the Iron Throne. The new king had little love and less trust for any of his brother's children, and he had his mother, the Dowager Queen Visenya, to enforce his will. Queen Alyssa's household knights and servants were dismissed, together with the servants and companions of her children, and Jaehaerys and Alysanne were made wards of their great aunt, the fearsome Visenya. Hostages in all but name, they spent their uncle's reign being shuttled between Driftmark, Dragonstone, and King's Landing at the will of others, until Visenya's death in 44 AC offered Queen Alyssa an opportunity to escape, a chance she seized with alacrity, fleeing Dragonstone with Jaehaerys, Alysanne, and the Blade Dark sister. No reliable accounts of Princess Alysanne's life after the escape survive to this day. She does not appear again in the annals of the realm until the final days of Maegor's bloody reign, when her mother and Lord Rhaegar rode forth from Storm's End at the head of an army, whilst Alysanne, Jaehaerys, and their sister, Rhaena, descended on King's Landing with their dragons. Undoubtedly Princess Alysanne had handmaids and companions in the days that followed Maegor's death. Their names and particulars have not come down to us, unfortunately. We do know that none of them came with the princess when she and Jaehaerys fled the Red Keep on their dragons. Aside from the 7 knights of the Kingsguard and the castle garrison, cooks, stable hands, and other servants, the king and his bride were unattended on Dragonstone. That was hardly proper for a princess, let alone for a queen. Alysanne must have her household, and in that her mother, Alyssa, saw an opportunity to undermine, and mayhaps undo, her marriage. The Queen Regent resolved to dispatch to Dragonstone a carefully selected company of companions and servants to see to the young queen's needs. The plan, Grand Maester Benefer assures us, was Queen Alyssa's, but it was one that Lord Rhaegar assented to gladly, for he saw at once a way to twist it to his own ends. The aged Septon Oswyck, who had performed the wedding rites for Jaehaerys and Alysanne, kept the sept on Dragonstone, but a young lady of royal birth required one of her own sex to see to her religious instruction. Queen Alyssa sent 3, the formidable septa Isabel, and 2 well-born novices of Alysanne's own age, Lyra and Edith. To take charge of the serving girls and maids of Alysanne's household, she dispatched Lady Lucinda Tully, the wife of the Lord of Riverrun, whose fierce piety was renowned through all the land. With her came her younger sister, Ella of House Broom, a modest maid whose name had briefly been offered as a match for Jaehaerys. Lord Celtigar's daughters, so recently scorned by the hand as being chinless, breastless, and witless, were included as well. We had as well get some use of them, Lord Rogar supposedly told their father. 3 other girls of noble birth made up the remainder of the company, Onich from the Vale, the Stormlands, and the Reach, Janice of House Templeton, Corianne of House Wild, and Rosamond of House Ball. Queen Alyssa wanted her daughter attended by suitable companions of her own age and station, no doubt, but that was not her sole motivation in sending these ladies to Dragonstone. Septa Isabel, the novices Edith and Lyra, and the deeply pious Lady Lucinda and her sister had a further charge. It was the hope of the Queen Regent that these fiercely righteous women might impress upon Alysanne, and mayhaps even Jaehaerys, that for brother to lie with sister was an abomination in the eyes of the faith. The children, as Alyssa persisted in calling the king and queen, were not evil, only young and willful. Suitably instructed, they might see the error of their ways and repent their marriage before it tore the realm apart. Or so she prayed. Lord Rogar's motives were baser. Unable to rely on the loyalty of the castle garrison or the knights of the Kingsguard, the hand needed eyes and ears on Dragonstone. All that Jaehaerys and Alysanne said and did was to be reported back to him, he made clear to Lady Lucinda and the others. He was especially anxious to learn if and when the king and queen intended on consummating their marriage. That, he stressed, must be prevented. And mayhaps there was more. And now unfortunately we must give some consideration to a certain distasteful book that first appeared in the Seven Kingdoms some 40 years after the events presently being discussed. Copies of this book still pass from hand to hand in the low places of Westeros, and may oft be found in certain brothels, those catering to patrons able to read, and the libraries of men of low morals, where they are best kept under lock and key, hidden from the eyes of maidens, goodwives, children, and the chaste and pious. The book in question is known under various titles, amongst them Sins of the Flesh, The High and the Low, A Wanton's Tale, and The Wickedness of Men, but all versions bear the subtitle A Caution for Young Girls. It purports to be the testimony of a young maid of noble birth who surrendered her virtue to a groom in her lord father's castle, gave birth to a child out of wedlock, and thereafter found herself partaking of every sort of wickedness imaginable during a long life of sin, suffering, and slavery. If the author's tale is true, parts of its strained credulity during the course of her life she found herself a handmaid to a queen, the paramour of a young knight, a camp follower in the disputed lands of Essos, a serving wench in Myr, a mummer in Tyrosh, the plaything of a corsair queen in the Basilisk Isles, a slave in Old Volantis where she was tattooed, pierced, and ringed, the handmaid of a Carthene warlock, and finally the mistress of a pleasure house in Lee, before ultimately returning to Aldtown and the faith. Purportedly she ended her life as a septa in the Starry Sept, where she set down this story of her life to warn other young maids not to do as she had done. The lascivious details of the author's erotic adventures need not concern us here. Our only interest is in the early part of her sordid tale, the story of her youth. For the alleged author of A Caution for Young Girls is none other than Corianne Wild, one of the girls sent to Dragonstone as a companion to the Little Queen. We have no way to ascertain the veracity of her story, nor even whether she was in truth the author of this infamous book. Some argue plausibly that the text is the product of several hands, for the style of the prose varies greatly from episode to episode. Lady Corianne's early history, however, is confirmed in the accounts of the maester who served at the Rain House during her youth. At the age of 13, he records, Lord Wild's younger daughter was indeed seduced and deflowered by a surly lad from the stables. In A Caution for Young Girls, this lad is described as a handsome boy her own age, but the maester's account differs, painting the seducer as a pox-scarred varlet of 30 years distinguished only by a male member as stout as a stallion's. Whatever the truth, the surly lad was gelded and sent to the wall as soon as his deed was known, whilst Lady Corianne was confined to her chambers to give birth to his baseborn son. The boy was sent away soon after birth, to Storm's End, where he would be fostered by one of the castle stewards and his barren wife. The bastard boy was born in 48 AC, according to the Maester's journals. Lady Corianne was carefully watched afterward, but few beyond the walls of the Rain House knew of her shame. When the Raven came to summon her to King's Landing, her lady mother told her sternly that she was never to speak of her child or her sin. In the Red Keep, they will take you for a maiden. But as the girl made her way to the city, escorted by her father and a brother, they stopped for the night at an inn on the south bank of the Blackwater Rush, beside the ferry landing. There she found a certain great lord awaiting her arrival. And here the tale grows even more tangled, for the identity of the man at the inn is a matter of some dispute, even amongst those who accept a caution for young girls to contain a modicum of truth. Over the years and centuries, as the book was copied and recopied, many changes and emendations crept into the text. The maesters who labor at the Citadel copying books are rigorously trained to reproduce the original word for word, but few mundane scribes are so disciplined. Such septons, septas, and holy sisters as copy and illuminate books for the faith oft strike out or alter any passages they believe to be offensive, obscene, or theologically unsound. As virtually the whole of a caution for young girls is obscene, it was not like to have been transcribed by either maesters or septons. Given the number of copies known to exist, hundreds, though as many more were burned by Baelor the Blessed, the scribes responsible were most likely septons expelled from the faith for drunkenness, theft, or fornication, failed students who left the citadel without a chain, hired quills from the free cities, or mummers the worst of all. Lacking the rigor of maesters, such scribes oft feel free to improve on the texts they are copying. Mummers in particular are prone to this. In the case of a caution for young girls, such improvements largely consisted of adding ever more episodes of depravity and changing the existing episodes to make them even more disturbing and lascivious. As alteration followed alteration over the years, it became ever more difficult to ascertain which was the original text, to the extent that even maesters at the Citadel cannot agree as to the title of the book, as has been noted. The identity of the man who met Corianne while in the inn by the ferry, if indeed such a meeting ever took place, is another matter of contention. In the copies entitled Sins of the Flesh and the High and the Low, which tend to be the older versions, and the shortest, the man at the inn is identified as Sir Boris Baratheon, eldest of Lord Rogar's 4 brothers. In A Wanton's Tale and the Wickedness of Men, however, the man is Lord Rogar himself. All these versions agree on what happened next. Dismissing Lady Corianne's father and brother, the Lord commanded the girl to disrobe so he might inspect her. He ran his hands over every part of me, she wrote, and bade me turn this way and that and bend and stretch and open my legs to his gaze, until at last he pronounced himself satisfied. Only then did the man reveal the purpose of the summons that had brought her to King's Landing. She was to be sent to Dragonstone, a supposed maid, to serve as one of Queen Alysanne's companions, but once there she was to use her wiles and her body to beguile the king into bed. Jaehaerys is a man made like as not, and besotted with his sister, this man supposedly told her, but Alysanne is but a child and you are a woman any man would want. Once his grace tastes your charms he may come to his senses and abandon this folly of a marriage. He may even choose to keep you afterward, who can say? There can be no question of marriage, of course, but you would have jewels, servants, whatever you might want. There are rich rewards in being a king's bedwarmer. If Alysanne should discover you abed together, so much the better. She is a prideful girl and would be quick to abandon an unfaithful spouse. And if you should get with child again, you and the babe would be well taken care of, and your father and mother will be richly rewarded for your service to the crown. Asterisk 2. Can we put any credence in this tale? At this late date, so far removed from the events in question, with all the principals long dead, there is no way to be certain. Beyond the testimony of the girl herself, we have no source to verify that this meeting by the ferry ever took place. And if some Baratheon did indeed meet privily with Corianne while before she reached King's Landing, we cannot know what words he might have spoken to her. He could as easily have simply been instructing her in her duties as a spy and tattle, as the other girls had been instructed. Archmaester Cray, writing at the Citadel in the last years of King Jaehaerys's long reign, believed that the meeting at the inn was a clumsy calumny intended to blacken the name of Lord Rogar, and went so far as to attribute the lie to Sir Boris Baratheon himself, who quarreled bitterly with his brother in later life. Other scholars, including Maester Rybin, the Citadel's foremost expert on banned, forbidden, fraudulent, and obscene texts, put the story down as no more than a bawdy tale of the sort known to excite the lust of young boys, bastards, whores, and the men who partake of their favors. Amongst the small folk there are always men of a lascivious character who delight in tales of great lords and noble knights despoiling maidens, Rybin wrote, for this persuades them that their betters share their own base lusts. Mayhaps. Yet there are certain things that we do know beyond a doubt that may allow us to draw our own conclusions. We do know that the younger daughter of Morgan Wild, Lord of the Rain House, was deflowered at an early age and gave birth to a bastard boy. We can be reasonably certain that Lord Rogar knew of her shame. Not only was he Lord Morgan's liege, but the child was placed in his own household. We know that Corianne Wild was amongst the maids who were sent to Dragonstone as companions for Queen Alysanne, a singularly curious choice, if a lady-in-waiting was all she was meant to be. For scores of other young girls of noble birth and suitable age were also available, girls whose maidenheads were intact and whose virtue was beyond reproach. Why her? Many have asked in the years since. Did she have some special gift, some particular charm? If so, no one remarked on it at the time. Could Lord Rogar or Queen Alyssa have been indebted to her Lord Father or Lady Mother for some past favor or kindness? We have no record of it. No plausible explanation for the selection of Corianne Wild has ever been offered, save for the simple, ugly answer proffered by a caution for young girls. She was sent to Dragonstone not for Alysanne, but for Jaehaerys. 3 court records indicate that Septa Isabel, Lady Lucinda, and the other women chosen for Alysanne Targaryen's household boarded the trading galley Wise Woman at dawn on the 7th day of the 2nd moon of 50 AC, and left for Dragonstone on the morning tide. Queen Alyssa had sent word of their coming ahead by Raven, yet even so she had some concern that the Wise Women, as they became known from that day forth, would find the gates of Dragonstone closed to them. Her fears were unfounded. The little queen and 2 Kingsguard met them at the harbor as they disembarked, and Alysanne welcomed each of them with glad smiles and gifts. Before we relate what happened afterward, let us turn our gaze briefly to Fair Isle, where Rhaena Targaryen, the Queen in the West, resided with her new husband and a court of her own. It will be recalled that Queen Alyssa had been no more pleased by her eldest daughter's 3rd marriage than by the one her son would soon make, though Rhaena's marriage was of less consequence. She was not alone in this, for in truth Andro Farman was a curious choice for one with the blood of the dragon in her veins. The 2nd son of Lord Farman, not even the heir, Andro was said to be a handsome boy with pale blue eyes and long flaxen hair, but he was 9 years younger than the queen, and even at his own father's court there were those who scorned him as half a girl himself, for he was soft of speech and gentle of nature. A singular failure as a squire, he had never become a knight, having none of the martial skills of his lord father and elder brother. For a time, his sire had considered sending him to Aldtown to forge a maester's chain, until his own maester told him that the boy was simply not clever enough, and could hardly read nor write. Later, when asked why she had chosen such an unpromising spouse, Rhaena Targaryen replied, "He was kind to me." Andro's father had been kind to her as well, offering her refuge on Fair Isle after the battle beneath the God's Eye, when her uncle, King Maegor, was demanding her capture and the poor fellows of the realm were denouncing her as a vile sinner and her daughters as abominations. Some have put forward the suggestion that the widowed queen took Andro for her husband in part to repay his father for that kindness, for Lord Farman, himself a 2nd son who had never expected to rule, was known to have great fondness for Andro, despite his deficiencies. Mayhaps there is some truth in that assertion, but another possibility, first put forward by Lord Farman's maester, may cut closer to the bone. The queen found her true love on Fair Isle. Maester Smike wrote to the Citadel, not with Andro, but with his sister, Lady Alyssa. 3 years Andro's elder, Alyssa Farman shared her brother's blue eyes and long flaxen hair, but elsewise she was as unlike him as a sibling could be. Sharp of wit and sharper of tongue, she loved horses, dogs, and hawks. She was a fine singer and a skilled archer, but her great love was sailing. The wind our steed were the words of the Farmans of Fair Isle, who had sailed the western seas since the dawn. Age, and Lady Alyssa embodied them. As a child, it was said that she spent more time at sea than upon the land. Her father's crews used to laugh to see her climbing the rigging like a monkey. She sailed her own boat around Fair Isle at the age of 4 and 10, and by the time she was 20 she had voyaged as far north as Bear Island and as far south as the Arbor. Ofttimes, to the horror of her lord father and lady mother, she spoke of her desire to take a ship beyond the western horizon to learn what strange and wondrous lands might lie on the far side of the Sunset Sea.